hopefully. So I've been in the field for 30 years. I've done most of my original work was in Southeast Asia, where I worked in Hanoi, which celebrated its millennium 12 years ago. So it was one of the world's oldest cities. And it was just, looking at the different elements of architecture there. I then went on to work primarily in protected areas and national parks in Western Canada related to tourism. In 2001 to 2003, I was director of the International Year of Ecotourism. So basically traveling around the world, setting up meetings and initiatives to try and improve nature-based tourism in protected areas and national parks around the world, and involving communities as much as possible. And then after that, I've taught and worked on cultural tourism and cultural heritage projects around the world. And now my focus is primarily Africa. And in fact, I'm going to Sierra Leone next week to provide tourism training for a country that's really trying to establish a solid foundation on cultural heritage and to get their first World Heritage Site nominated as well. So it's my second time there, but it's just having done much of my work in Asia, it's nice to have a different lens and see, how people are grasping their intangible and tangible cultural heritage and trying to promote it as much as possible for these economic development opportunities that we discussed.
So the first question is related to the regeneration of city and region through cultural heritage. And the question is, what exactly means and what exactly, for your point of view, the community should expect to see a local government and public body organization do in relation with this cluster?
A lot of the work that I do involves cultural tourism, and specifically cultural tourism as a tool for economic development within cities, within regions, within protected areas, sort of a broad base of destinations where cultural tourism is seen as a driver to support local economic growth and development, and hopefully in a sustainable manner. And I think that, particularly when it comes to cultural heritage, you have to look at it in two ways, and that's, the intangible, the things that we eat, the things that we have created, the things that are, sort of the manifestation of what happens in a day-to-day life to people. And at the same time, the built or the monumental type heritage where people actually live and they create these things, or they serve as platforms where through art or through decor or through architecture or other facets, these intangible cultural heritage traditions are displayed fully for the visitors and the citizens who live there in that place. The challenge has been in a number of destinations is that buildings that are 200, 300, 400, 500 years old or longer are expensive to maintain. And they weren't necessarily created with the mindset that, we are going to have internet, we're going to have accessibility, we're going to have all these different things that we expect now within the 21st century. So that's one element. The other aspect is that for architectural and other reasons, many of these are low scale. And as you know, in many large cities, whether you're in Verona or Ottawa or some other place, there's always big population demands for people to move into cities. And so to that end, while there is this desire to retain this built cultural heritage and these structures, there are often population and other demands, real estate prices and other factors that are driving up the cost of maintaining and managing these places. And, there's a constant need to retrench the fact that it's important to retain the cultural fabric for quality of life for the residents who are there, but also for the expectations that visitors have coming to a historic city or place, whether it's Venice, whether it's Verona, whether it's Florence, whether it's some other place. It's really important to try and find that balance between the two.
Is all related to the second cluster, is promote adaptive reuse of heritage building. And I have a small experience here in Verona. Last week I was reading my local newspaper, and I found out that the Chamber of Commerce, that is the owner of a part of the Dominus Mercatorum, is the very beautiful historical merchant house built in the Middle Age in front of an historic square, Piazza delle Erbe. Very, very beautiful. The Chamber of Commerce decided to sell it. And the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Verona stated that this prestigious building will return to its former glory thanks to the intervention of the new owners. We are confident that the new owner will be able to give to the Mercadorums back to the central role it deserves. Yeah, so the question here is, okay, but how can we ensure an adaptive reuse of this building?
Okay, thanks for that question. And indeed, that's a big challenge. And you know, especially when if you've owned houses or if you move from property to property. I've lived in 5 different houses in the past 25 years. You want to make it your own, and you want to basically, you know, with colors, whether the interior or the exterior. Sometimes you try and keep the house as is, but in other cases, you know, you want to reuse different parts of it, or you want to find new ways of using different parts of the house. So to try and hold owners to say, you know, oh, this is what we expect, and you're going to spend your money to ensure that, you know, you have this restoration or conservation of this place so that it can be going back to its former glory, as you said. That's easier said than done, in the sense that, you know, you're telling someone how to spend their money. That becomes problematic sometimes. But at the same time, you know, if you're buying within a historic center, or if you're buying within a World Heritage Site, or if you're buying within this, you know, this district where there's, you know, these expectations of building management codes, you've already made that decision, hopefully with the understanding that you will have some kind of, not constraints, but some kind of borders with which you have to operate within. Because there's the fact that, you know, you are part of that neighborhood. And yes, you have bought this historic house, but it's not like you can put up a tower there, or it's not that, you know, they want to have a modern architecture piece there instead. So that's one aspect. It's the key that, you know, there is the understanding that a person, he or she who buys this place, or if it's a family or business, there are expectations that come to building within a historic quarter or district or site. The second thing is that, you know, it's hard to tell people how to spend their money, but at the same time, you try and create that expectation, and that expectation is done through bylaws. And so when you are into a municipal situation, I'm trained as an urban planner as well, and I know the power of bylaws and the necessity of maintaining building guidelines in terms of height, massing, colors, all the different aspects that are there. And I think that, you know, the municipal districts are often as good as the bylaws that are there to support them. So that's really important to recognize that at the same time, and not just, you know, the day-to-day planning, but the conservation and the historic structure laws and bylaws are in place. The third thing, and I think this is really important to remember as well, is that, remember I said at the beginning, many of these buildings 300, 400, 500 years ago were not built with accessibility or Wi-Fi or any of these other elements in mind, and, you know, climate change and other factors that we have to deal with now. And I think that there's a real need to recognize that you can bring these places back to a certain degree, but they're still confronted by the realities of what we have as modern day bylaws and planning regulations. You know, there are some challenges that I've seen through my work where disabled access is a mandate. It's not just a request, it's a mandate. And you really have to think of, you know, you're finding a lot of instances where you have to be very creative. And in fact, something that I saw last week from some architecture colleagues is that, you know, there's big concern with regard to climate change and various impacts in terms of sustainability and energy and other factors. And there's a new initiative where, in fact, it's not far from Verona. There's this company that produces these special roof tiles, and these roof tiles generate solar energy. And so to that end, you're still able to have that traditional look and feel for
Yeah.
the structure, for the adaptive reuse, but you've also done it in a way that you reduce the climate change impacts of that structure, and at the same time are able to generate energy for its use and management. So on that end, the structure is there. Obviously, if you're going to have someone living there or operating there, some kind of business or some sort of activity within that space, you need modernizing and updating, and hopefully in a way that is positive and beneficial to the people who live in and around it.
Yeah.
But in order to do so, it needs to be supported by a strong municipal structure and bylaws, because sometimes your idea of what works might not necessarily be someone else's.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think the relation between this historical building and the opportunity coming from innovation is huge. And sometimes we see just some kind of criticism related to the possibility to embed this building with solar panels or other kind of technology. And but I believe as well that we need to thinking more with a sense of progression, with a sense of innovations, and to support the local community for the development of a smart city. Because I also believe smart city doesn't mean that this to be done by only technology or new buildings.
And I think that, and you used the key word there, and that's innovation, in the sense that, we have so many different ways of stepping back and looking at buildings now. And, certainly the building techniques and the design and the architecture of that, several centuries ago, the buildings are still there. And, and then, so
Yeah.
that's something, it says something about the way that they were constructed and the original sort of thinking and basis behind them. But certainly, there are, very excellent schools in Italy and other countries that can take the practices that saying, okay, we have renewed these structures, or we're having these different sorts of opportunities or things that we have to address as part of the building program that's required now for new buildings, restorations, conservation, or whatever. And so within that frame, this is where you start innovating and saying, what are the options when it comes to access, when it comes to interpretation, in terms of the types of uses you can have for a place now. All these thoughts are there, but it's how you take that, whether it's through ARTI or whether it's through some other body in your province or in the country or elsewhere, that can say, this is, good practice in terms of what we can do when we are trying to conserve and maintain these buildings for adaptive reuse and other purposes. And really, we have these kinds of platforms to share that information and to at least hopefully drive the restoration conservation process in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Fergus. I have the last question, and is related to the third clusters. So the third cluster is the balanced access to cultural heritage with sustainable cultural tourism and natural heritage. Yeah, so here comes to my mind one point is in relation to beautiful city that is Venice, and I see that this point is always under discussion since long time, and but unfortunately the Venetian population drops significantly every year, and the real estate is more related to this bed and breakfast and short rental to attract tourists instead of, for example, students or either remote workers. Yeah. And honestly, I'm a bit concerned because I see this kind of similarity also in my city here in Verona, in the city center. So, what do you think? What is your opinion about the solution and potential actions to work on these clusters?
It's been an ongoing question in Venice, as you know, for a long time. In terms, it has been evolving into, I would argue, it's one of the world's premier tourism destinations, because when you have when you say Venice, people immediately think gondolas, you think the canals, you think Piazza San Marco. You think of, you have all these sort of images of a place right away that are very popular internationally. And like Paris, like the Taj Mahal, like the pyramids, there are people have specific ideas and images of what it's like to visit a place and to have that experience. But on the flip side, they don't necessarily have that experience of what it is like to live there, and and the quality of life that you have, and the day-to-day services that you and I expect, to go shopping and to go to a hardware store, to send our children to school. I mean, all these things, that's totally different from the visitor who's there for a day or two or a week.
Yeah.
And I know that in the case of Venice, obviously it's been dealing with a number of things, not just over tourism, but flooding and some of the other environmental issues that they've been dealing with, and housing, and other factors. And I think that perhaps places like Verona, Padova, and others are dealing with the spillover effects, where people can't live in Venice, or if they can't access it easily, it's easier to live outside and one of the bigger cities instead, and then commute there, do your work. I know that from a World Heritage standpoint, I know that some places like Barcelona, for example, and Amsterdam have put controls on the number of tourism behavior, tourism activities, but also specifically things like short-term rentals and like Airbnb or Vrbo, just because of the fact that they are recognizing that they're losing housing stock, and it's becoming a really big issue. To the point that some places, the communities, I can give you a couple of examples. So daughters of friends of ours, they live just outside of a World Heritage Site called the Rocky Mountain Parks World Heritage Site in Western Canada. It's very expensive and very difficult to find housing there. So what they've decided to do instead is they have 4 or 5 vans, vehicles, and they found a parking lot, and they sleep in their vans every night in this parking lot. That's their accommodation in that community. And this is a small mountain community of about 10,000 people. But even with that in mind, you cannot find housing in these places, or affordable housing. And so, that was their response. Other places in the community where I live, they have a purpose-built Airbnb structure, so that it's 2 stories, it's in the heart of the community. But they said, if you want to do any Airbnb, it has to be here. And so in that sense, they've actually thought about, ways of trying to put sort of limits around it. And finally, if you're at a place like Barcelona, as I mentioned, in their tourism plan that I believe was municipal tourism plan, which I believe was introduced in 2020, specifically, no more Airbnbs or short-term rentals within the historic city center. So they've made that determination. So again, there are options, some unusual, like those vans. I don't think you want to, I don't think you want many vans in parking lots in Verona. I don't think that's probably a popular idea.
It's difficult.
It might be a little hard, but do know that cities are thinking about it, and they are trying to be creative, and often it comes down to limitations, restrictions, or bylaws that try to put some constraints or controls in place.
Yeah.
But the reality is that for a place like Venice, I think I said it's below 50% now. The people who are there are actual residents, and so I know it's in regular decline. And at some point, the authorities have to say, is it a subsidy? Do we build housing, or do we set aside housing that can still be rented? Because I'm sure rentals are a big problem there as well, if you choose to live there. And what do we need to do to maintain the vitality and quality of this space? Because it's, as I always tell my audiences, tourists can come and go, but the Venetians still have to live there, and they're the ones who have to deal with whatever comes before or after. The same with the Veronese, the same in Firenze, all these places. Tourists will come and go, and they appreciate the beauty, the fine food, the very nice people, the atmosphere, but at the same time, they can leave.
Yes.
I mean, this is your place.
Yeah.
So there's one other thing that I wanted to add, and this is that I'm not sure if you're fully familiar with ECOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, but we are one of the 3 advisory bodies to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. And so we advise them on World Heritage, along with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and ECROM, which is based in Rome, and that's the training body. In November this year, so 2 months ago, we established our new International Cultural Heritage Tourism Charter. And I highly recommend that your colleagues take a look at it, because it's the 3rd iteration of the charter since 1976, when we started our relationship with UNESCO. The second was in 1999. And then we had a number of initiatives or activities that happened between 1999 and 2017, like the Charter on Intangible Cultural Heritage, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So all kinds of activities were happening there that needed to be addressed. And so we took what had happened in the past, the evolution in the field of cultural heritage, cultural tourism, intangible cultural heritage, and we placed that within a new charter. And I think, in fact, we have an Italian version. So good for you. You have an actual translated one, and we have this translated now into 9 languages, including Mandarin and Arabic. To finish off, is the basis of it is that it is a community-driven approach, in the sense that if you're trying to plan, develop, and manage community-based cultural heritage tourism within your town, city, or region, there are the elements that are there that are really trying to look at supporting community resiliency and sustainability of that tourism as well. And I think that it's one of the things that you're starting to see, moving forward, because as you said at the beginning, there's a new paradigm. And I believe that, 5, 10, 15 years from now, the way we've thought about cultural heritage for the past 50 years, when we've had the World Heritage Convention that has been in place, last year was its 50th year of commemoration. I believe the next 5, 10, 15 years will be a very different perspective in terms of how we look at cultural heritage and how we use it. So,
thank you very much, Fergus. Thank you so much. I was